so thoroughly, impartially, and professionally. And today, presented with its findings, we must speak with one voice to condemn the use of chemical weapons by Daesh and this attack on Khan Sheikhoun by the Syrian regime. We must hold those responsible to account. But experience to date suggests that we will not be able to do that. Russia continues to deny what happened. Since the attack on that morning in April, Russia has advanced a contradictory series of hypotheses and claims, moving from one to the next as soon as it is proven untrue, as it seeks to prevent this council holding the Assad regime to account. Faced with science and fact, Russia has had no answer but fantasy and fiction, and has provided no evidence for its claims. The investigators have looked at the evidence. In their report, they set out the rigor with which they have approached their task, how they have received information from 12 member states, including the Syrian regime itself, how they have scientifically corroborated that information, how they have consulted numerous independent experts and scientists. The JIM reached its conclusions not on the basis of any one single piece of evidence. Rather, it built its case on the totality of evidence available to it, as any professional, rational investigation would do. And those conclusions are clear. Aircraft of the Syrian Air Force were in the vicinity of Khan Sheikhoun on the 4th of April between 6:30 and 7 a.m. at the time munitions were dropped on the town. The crater from which the sarin emanated was created by an aerial bomb dropped on the 4th of April. And most tellingly of all, sarin found at the scene in samples supplied by the Syrian regime contained the same unique signature found in the chemicals handed over by the Syrian regime to the OPCW in 2014. Monsieur Moulet, the Russian representative suggests sarin can be easily made or homemade. Could you please explain just how complex it would be to recreate that sarin exactly to the unique chemical signature of the Syrian regime? In 2013, Russia promised the world that Syria would abandon all of its chemical weapons. Today, to the cost of the people of Syria and to the cost of the international consensus against chemical weapons, that promise remains unfulfilled, and Russia continues to protect Assad and his regime. So I call on the whole Council to renew the JIM's existing mandate, which has delivered the rigorous and conclusive findings we are discussing today. There is more work to be done. The OPCW fact-finding mission has now reported evidence of likely sarin use in nearby La Temena on 30th of March. We need to support the JIM and to enable it to carry out its important work. The resolution Russia has circulated today is not a serious attempt at renewal. It is a cynical ploy to discredit a professional, independent, and impartial body. Russia is trying to shoot the messenger to cover up for the crimes of the Syrian regime. And to the Syrian government, I say that evidence has been carefully gathered of the inhuman crimes you have committed. Russia is protecting you, for now, but the day will come when you are held accountable for your actions before international law, and your victims will get the justice that they deserve. Mr. President, there is no middle ground in the United Nations Security Council when it comes to chemical weapons. We must condemn the use of these weapons in Syria and support the JIM to identify those responsible. To do otherwise is to effectively condone these appalling attacks and to undermine the international architecture that we collectively designed to stop them.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank High Representative Ms. Nakamitsu and Mr. Mollet for their briefings. China's position on the issue of chemical weapons has been clear and consistent. We strongly oppose the use of chemical weapons by any state, organization, or individual for any purpose or under any circumstances. China is deeply concerned about and strongly condemn the use of chemical weapons in Syria. China supports the OPCW UN Joint Investigative Mechanism in their investigation relevant incident in a thorough, objective, and impartial way. The investigation should be based on solid evidence and reach conclusions that can stand the test of time and is based on verifiable facts. China takes note of the report recently submitted by the GIM. We also note that as too much time passed after the incident and due to security reasons, the mechanism decided not to carry out on-site field investigation in Hanshehong and Ormhosh. Some Security Council members has expressed hope that the GIM improve its methodology, field investigation, and refine its mandate. Members of the Security Council on condemning chemical weapon attacks in Syria and requesting investigation relevant incidents have consensus and should continue to negotiate on GIM's methodology, mandate, and extension patiently and strive for a united message. This will help finding out the truth of the attacks and bring the responsible parties to justice and deter all those who attempt chemical weapon attacks in Syria in the future. Mr. President, a political solution is the only way out for the Syrian issue. Thanks to joint efforts of all parties of the international community, there is positive momentum in the political solution of the Syrian issue. The last round of Astana dialogue just concluded, and a new round of Geneva peace talk will begin in the end of November. The political resolution of the Syrian issue has entered a new and critical stage. China calls on members of the Security Council to focus on the big picture of maintaining the Syrian political process and stay united on the Syrian chemical weapon issue so as to create favorable conditions for all parties in Syria to reach swiftly solutions acceptable to all parties through the Geneva talks, and at the same time play a constructive role for the thorough, impartial, and appropriate solution of the Syrian issue as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're grateful for the report provided by the Undersecretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, and we're also grateful for Mr. Mulet's report. He's, of course, the head of the GIM. We're also grateful for the letter sent by the Secretary General on the 30th of October. Mr. President, once again, Bolivia expresses its strongest and most categorical condemnation of the use of chemical weapons or the use of chemical substances as weapons because this is an unjustifiable and criminal act wherever, whenever, and by whomever it is committed, because their use is a serious crime against international law and a threat to international peace and security. We agree with the Secretary General's assertion in his 30th of October 2017 letter when he says that there can be no justification for their use regardless of the circumstances and regardless of who uses them, speaking, of course, of chemical weapons. Mr. President, we reaffirm the need to maintain unity here in the Council to ensure that those who use chemical weapons are held accountable for their acts and that their acts do not go unpunished. We take note of what was shared with us in the briefing through the OPAC report, where it says that this alleged use of the chemical weapons and the presence of sarin and sarin-related substance was detected. We would, in this connection, reiterate that OPAC in its fact-finding mission, as well as the GIM, must abide by their mandates, and they must ensure that their work is carried out in the most objective, methodical, technical, reliable manner possible, and they must be assisted and depoliticized, and it must be an independent, impartial, comprehensive, and inclusive investigation. Mr. President, we reiterate that this investigation work of OPCW is important, and its mandate must therefore be renewed. We must, in this way, safeguard its investigations, and so far we have a number of 60 such investigations. It must be carried out in an objective and impartial manner, and they must carry out on-site visits where the incidents take place, and will enable them to achieve the expected results as long as the minimum security arrangements are provided. Therefore, we believe that the renewal of the mandate should be totally depoliticized. We must maintain the integrity and independence of the mechanism, and to this end, we must take into account exclusively the purpose for which it was created, and we must also establish a timeline and a clear methodology for its work. Finally, Bolivia will continue to study the report and its scopes. We reiterate the need to maintain unity in this council, and to make sure that the mechanism enjoys our consensus and support. Thank you.
The representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia for his statement. I now give the floor to representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank High Representative Zumi Nakamisu and Assistant Secretary General Edmund Muley for their respective briefings on the reports presented by the OPCW and the OPCW UN Joint Investigative Mechanism, which we have an obligation to examine and scrutinize very seriously and scrupulously. We appreciate all the efforts that have been made in investigating the use of chemical weapons in Syria, as well as in identifying those responsible for this serious crime. Our position on this issue has been reiterated many times. The use of chemical weapons by any actor, either state or non-state, is not only abhorrent, but also constitutes a serious violation of international law and a major threat to global peace and security. The continued use of chemical weapons in Syria is indeed a source of grave concern. At the latest fact-finding mission report on Latimana incident confirms, and we join other members in reiterating our condemnation in the strongest terms possible of these horrible and dreadful acts. That's why we support any and all efforts to hold those responsible for these heinous crimes accountable on the basis of robust and concrete evidence. In this regard, we appreciate the Joint Investigative Mechanism for its substantive report. Let me state here from the outset that we have the highest respect for the mechanism and its leadership. Mr. President, we understand the mechanism has been working under extremely challenging circumstances due to a highly sensitive political environment and complex security considerations, as its report rightly stated, as also reiterated by ASG Muley today. We respect and appreciate all the efforts and dedication by the leadership panel in carrying out their heavy responsibilities in spite of these difficulties, among which one should not overlook the fact that they were working under tremendous pressure of time. It is therefore totally unfair to expect an absolutely flawless work and result, which would obviate members of the Council asking for more explanation. It is in that spirit that we have tried to examine the report, which, no doubt, in many instances is very technical and thus requiring some technical knowledge in the area. In fact, the mechanism has been very careful in its analysis of this very complex situation. It says in the report, it examined 2 scenarios in detail, and its conclusion flows from those investigations. But they are careful enough in avoiding being entirely definitive. For instance, concerning the crater in Kanshikun, even though they say the crater, quote, was most probably caused by a heavy object traveling at a high velocity, such as an aerial bomb, end of quotation, they nonetheless add that they, quote, could not rule out that the crater was caused by other means, end of quotation. This is important despite the qualification reiterated by ACG Mule a while ago that this is unlikely. Similarly, based on video footage confirmed to be authentic, Jim concluded that the Syrian aircraft was in the, quote, immediate vicinity of Kanshikun between 6:30 and 0700 on April 4, 2017, end of quotation. However, the same report stated that, and I quote, to date, the mechanism has not found specific information confirming whether or not the Syrian Air Force Sukhoi 22 operating from Al-Shirat airbase launched an aerial attack against Kamshikun, end of quotation. Again, Jim's report describes the sarin released at Kanshikun was most likely from the original stock of the Syrian Arab Republic. But the report adds that this analysis should warrant further study. Moreover, the report, both in its analysis and findings, admits that there are irregularities and discrepancies. Some of them, Jim accepts, are, quote unquote, potentially important. As a result of this and other irregularities in the report itself, we find it difficult, with all fairness and genuine curiosity, how the mechanism could be confident that it has completed its work. Of course, we know the Jim was not able to visit the site of the attacks, particularly Kanshikun. Its report acknowledged that a visit to the site could have been of value, but then it says, as stated by ACG Mule a while ago, the security risks outweigh the possible benefits to the investigation. It further stated that should conditions improve and it be determined that an on-site investigation would produce valuable new information, a visit could take place in the future. The problem is the Jim has already made its conclusion without having to visit the site, which in its own admission could have been of value to the investigation. Now, there is something which should be mentioned here. ASG Mule said the government of the Syrian Arab Republic has provided good cooperation. This was particularly true in connection with the visit of Al-Shirat airbase and its examination of the logbooks and flight information for April 4, 2017. The information secured did not seem to confirm the conclusion the mechanism subsequently made, again suggesting the need for more work to be done. Mr. President, now, it's important to be fair to the mechanism and the leadership panel. They cannot be asked to deliver more than what they have promised to deliver pursuant to the method of work that is laid out in Annex 1 of its third report. What is expected of them is to identify the culprits to the greatest extent feasible and it might not be proper to require that their conclusion meet the standard of overwhelming evidence or even substantial evidence. But for sure, it would be fair to expect the conclusion be in conformity with the standard of sufficient evidence. No doubt, they have covered a lot of ground, and the findings so far cannot in any way thrown out the window, but they are not definitive. This is work in progress for which the leadership panel deserves a lot of credit. Without there would be any delegation that could impugn now to conclude the work has been completed. More work is needed. Because of this and other new cases which need to be investigated, we are convinced that it's vital to renew the mandate of JIM, and we hope we'll be able to do so by overcoming the differences within the Council on the matter. It is only through unity of purpose that the Council could address the threat and use of chemical weapons in Syria, as well as end its further use by any actor. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the outset, let me thank Ms. Nakamitsu and Mr. Mulé for their briefings today. I would like to start by reiterating that Sweden unequivocally condemns in the strongest terms the repeated use of chemical weapons in Syria. Chemical weapons use is illegal, constitutes a threat to international peace and security, and can amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity. There must be no immunity or impunity for chemical weapons attacks. Mr. President, I welcome the OPCW report on the implementation of Resolution 2118. We remain deeply concerned about the fact that the OPCW is still unable to verify Syria's initial declaration on its chemical weapons program due to a number of serious outstanding issues. We commend the continuing efforts of the Declaration Assessment Team. Full disclosure and proactive cooperation by the Syrian authorities are urgently required. We are deeply concerned about the findings of the latest FFM report regarding another sarin attack in the Idlib province, this time in Latamine on 30 March 2017. We look forward to the JIM's investigation regarding this attack. Mr. President, the joint investigative mechanism set out by this Council unanimously plays a critical role to protect the international disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. We offer our full support for JIM under its mandate to pursue objective, impartial, and independent investigations into chemical weapons attacks in Syria. We count on the professionalism and technical expertise represented in the JIM and the thorough forensic analysis they perform. We have provided financial support and technical expertise to the JIM to carry out its important work. We thank Mr. Mulé and his team for their efforts and for their latest report on the chemical weapons attack in Hormuz and Khan Sheikhoun. These were abhorrent and unacceptable attacks, adding to the number of cases of international crimes committed in this conflict by Daesh and by the Syrian regime. Particularly repugnant is the sarin attacks in the Idlib province, causing large numbers of casualties, including children and aid workers. The presence of military-grade sarin indicates that all stockpiles of sarin precursors in Syria have not been shipped out or destroyed in 2014, as was foreseen. Mr. President, the mechanism has done thorough work with all the research and corroborations necessary, as outlined in the report. On this basis, it has concluded that Daesh was responsible for the attack in Hormuz in September 2016, and the Syrian regime for the attack in Khan Sheikhoun in April 2017. With regard to the attack in Khan Sheikhoun, the mechanism has argued that only one of the 8 reviewed possible scenarios which could sustain detailed technical scrutiny using scientific and forensic techniques, is that of an air bomb delivered by the Syrian armed forces. We note that beyond the government and terrorist group responsible, it has not been possible to provide further information on the individuals or entities who were perpetrators, organizers, sponsors, or otherwise involved in the attacks, or exactly from where the attacks originated. Our own assessment of the JIM's report with regard to technical and scientific aspects is still ongoing. Mr. President, finally, let me turn briefly to the matter of the extension of the mandate of the JIM. All members of this Council have pledged support for its objective. As we stated at our last meeting, the JIM needs stability and predictability in order to continue its essential work. It is also important that we avoid the considerable cost that would follow from a time gap in the JIM's mandate. As the current mandate expires only in 10 days, it is key that we now unite to ensure a timely renewal. Sweden will continue to do its utmost over the coming days to seek to ensure a continuation of JIM and to protect its mandate. We will support all serious and genuine attempts to achieve this objective, and we stand ready to help facilitating efforts to find a way forward. The Syrian people, suffering every day from the brutalities of a conflict that has now lasted more than 6 years of conflict, deserve no less. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Sweden for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Monsieur le Président, la délégation sénégalaise.
Mr. President, the delegation of Senegal would like to thank you for convening this meeting in order to examine the seventh report of the Joint Investigative Mechanism of the UN, OPCW. I would like to thank Mrs. Nakamitsu and Mr. Edmond Moulet for their very informative briefings. And through them, I want to thank all the men and women who work in trying to establish the facts in order to attribute the responsibilities on the, as everyone has said, unacceptable use of chemical substances as weapons against civilians in the Syrian Arab Republic. Mr. President, as previously stated, my delegation would like to reiterate its strong condemnation of the chemical attacks in Syria, in particular the two we're examining today in Kham Sheikhoun and Housh, no matter who is responsible. As a state party to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and as a ardent defender of the non-proliferation regime, Senegal would like to reiterate our conviction that nothing can justify an atrocity such as the use of chemical substances as a weapon against civilians by anyone and under any circumstances. Mr. President, these attacks, but also the various allegations and continual allegations of the use of chemical weapons in Syria mentioned in the report and by the fact-finding mission of the OPCW demonstrate, as if any further proof was necessary, how important it is to continue the work of the Joint Investigative Mechanism. This is a body that is playing an important deterrent role, because the risk of weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of non-state groups is real. Non-state groups such as terrorist groups. This is a particular source of concern for Senegal. And indeed, my country would like to take this opportunity to commend the positive cooperation of the JIM with the other subsidiary bodies of the Council, including the 1540 and 1267 committees, in compliance with Resolution 2319. Senegal also welcomes the cooperation provided by certain member states to the mechanism during its investigative work. Mr. President, no matter what your views are regarding the report we're examining, my delegation is convinced that there's sufficient common ground among the members of the Council to allow us to renew the mandate of the gym, whose mandate will expire in 10 days. I would like to express the wish that the Council returns to the spirit of compromise and consensus on this extremely technical topic, as was the case during the adoption of resolutions 2118 in 2013, 2235 in 2015, and 2319 in 2016. All these decisions saw significant progress in tackling the issue of chemical weapons in Syria. In any case, because we are convinced that the JIM has made a significant contribution to establishing truth on the use of chemical weapons in Syria, but also how relevant it is to draw lessons from what has happened regarding the global non-proliferation architecture. For these reasons, my delegation would like to once again express its appreciation and reiterate our support for the JIM. We would encourage the JIM and to continue with its essential mission, which aims at implementing in an independent, impartial, and objective way the mandate established by Resolution 2235 and then renewed unanimously by us in Resolution 2319. It's important to recall that this mandate consists of identifying, as far as possible, the individuals, entities, or governments who have perpetrated, organized, or ordered the use as weapons of chemical products in the Syrian Arab Republic, including chlorine or any other toxic chemical substance, or those who have participated in this in any way. Since everyone agrees that there was a use of chemical weapons in Syria, and since there are further allegations that haven't yet been verified, the Senegal considers that the Security Council can reach an agreement to renew the mandate of the JIM. To conclude, Mr. President, I would like to repeat how important it is to find a negotiated political solution to the Syrian conflict. That is the crux of the matter, and this should be based on the Geneva Communiqué and Resolution 2254 as the only viable solution, making it possible to deal with the significant humanitarian challenges spawned by this conflict and to shed all possible light on the numerous allegations of the use of prohibited weapons in Syria. Thank you very much.
And I shall now make a statement in my capacity of the representative of Italy. And I'd like to, first of all, thank the High Representative Nakamitsu and Edmond Mulet for the briefings. You have our full support in your undertaking, which is crucial to uphold the international security mechanism architecture. And we thank the JIM for its seventh report, the result of an investigation that was conducted in the framework of very complex security challenges and constraints. Italy supports the work of the JIM. We hold its professionalism and independence in high regard and trust. Italy is deeply concerned by the findings of the report, as they confirm again that chemical weapons have been used in Syria. The JIM has so far verified 4 chemical attacks by the Syrian armed forces and 2 by Daesh. What happened in Khan Sheikhoun in April 2017 and in Osh in September 2016 is totally unacceptable and confirms the abysmal scale of human suffering in the Syrian conflict. We condemn it in the strongest terms. These episodes are a tragic reminder that international law, including these Council resolutions, as well as the international non-proliferation architecture, continue to be blatantly violated in Syria by the government and by terrorists, further eroding, as emphasized by the Secretary General in his latest report, the taboo against chemical weapons. And as long as nobody is held accountable for these acts, the risk of their reiteration will remain and even grow. Allegations of new incidents involving the use of sarin keep emerging, as examined by the OPCW fact-finding mission with regard to the incident in La Tamena. This is one more reason why fighting impunity, identifying the perpetrators and holding them accountable must be shared priorities of this Council. This is one more reason to renew the mandate of GIM, which will soon expire. On the implementation of Resolution 2118, we are disappointed that the recent high-level consultation between the OPCW and Syria last September were unable to achieve any significant progress. So as the global non-proliferation architecture continues to face extremely serious challenges, the Security Council has the responsibility to defend the integrity and credibility of these crucial long-standing norms of our collective security, preserving means of prevention and pathways for accountability in case of violations. The OPCW UN Joint Investigative Mechanism is a critical tool in this respect, and Italy fully supported the renewal of its mandate 2 weeks ago, mindful of the need to preserve its expertise, protect its independence, and uphold the credibility of its investigations. We are committed to engaging with the other Council members to achieve consensus on such a pressing objective, and we would like to thank the penholder, the US delegation, for its constructive efforts in pursuing a consensual solution, including through a draft that we consider a very good basis for discussions leading to preserve the unity of this Council. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Shukran.
I thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you for convening this important meeting. And we would also like to thank our colleagues who showed clearly that they've clearly showed the shortcomings that have beset the report under consideration. I especially noticed what Mr. Moulay said in his briefing, in that the mandate that he was given and which was given to the Joint Investigative Mechanism to investigate the incident in Khan Sheikhoun is not a political matter. He said that this is not a political issue. And the strange contradiction is that in that same briefing, Mr. Moulay considered that the use of chemicals in Khan Sheikhoun is a practice of political terrorism. I beg your pardon, chemical terrorism. My question to Mr. Moulay and the members, esteemed members of the Council, is as follows. Since when is chemical terrorism considered a strictly technical and non-political issue? Saying that the JIM's mandate is strictly technical within and as part of work in a political scene and in a political atmosphere, complex political atmosphere, as our distinguished ambassador from Ethiopia has said, saying this is like some lazy students would say in school that focusing on physical education alone is enough to succeed in education, and that there's no need to study the rest of the curriculum. How can the head of the JIM say that the information pertaining to the use of terrorist groups, by terrorist groups, of chemical weapons and smuggling them to neighboring countries, which is information that was submitted by my country's government to him and to the fact-finding mission before him, and to the counterterrorism committees before them, and to the 1540 committee before all of this, and to the Security Council in its entirety. In 130 letters, 130 letters on the use of chemicals in Syria and the smuggling of chemical weapons from neighboring countries. 130 letters. This is a whole book. Those we sent from the 6th of November 2012 to the 6th of November 2017. 5 years exactly. All of these letters pertain to the use of chemicals by armed terrorist groups in my country. Then Mr. Muley comes along and says that all of these crimes that we have informed him of and which have killed thousands of Syrians is a strictly technical matter, not a political one. And therefore, his briefing was completely devoid of any understanding of the complex political scene in my country. The mechanism's mandate cannot be strictly technical. This is not convincing proof. Mr. President, almost 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli, your compatriot, said that politics have no relation to morals. That's what Machiavelli said. And I can almost see him today observing on the behavior of the governments of some countries that proclaim morality and declare themselves guardians of the respect of international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter, while they themselves practice policies that belittle these very same noble principles and misuse them in order to further their destructive and interfering agendas. It is as if I see Machiavelli today standing here and observing on the behavior of some United Nations committees and commissions that are supposed to be neutral, professional, and credible, while their work and their reports prove that they are instead committees that are biased, politicized, and immoral, and are talented in their work by using false witnesses and sources that it calls open sources and fabricated evidence. And this is the state of the fact-finding mission and the joint investigative mechanism whose report we're discussing today. I will prove to you right now with scientific and legal evidence that this report is not neutral, nor is it professional, and has based its wrongful accusations to Syria on a process of the fabrication of evidence and the manipulation of information. It has used sly remarks and ambiguous statements that no criminal report must use in forming its allegations. Let's refer to the report so that we would count how many times the report uses the words likely and unlikely. And I repeat them in English, likely or unlikely, in discussing scientific evidence that must only be mentioned in surety. I will save the effort. These two words were used 32 times in the report. 32 times in the report. The words likely and unlikely were used. Despite this, the JIM's leadership found no problem in using the word confident, and I say it in English, confident, in its conclusions to point the finger of accusation to Syria in the Khan Sheikhun incident, despite the fact that the investigation that was held was partial and it ignored and manipulated the main three pillars of any criminal investigation. Mr. President, allow me here to note the following. Number one, the mechanisms report in paragraph 54 stated that to date, the Syrian Arab Republic has not provided the mechanism with the outcomes of the investigation of the Syrian National Committee. This is what was stated in this paragraph. And here I would like to direct this question directly to Mr. Muley, who's sitting right by my side, as he is drawing one circle after the other in front of him. What are the documents that I gave you, that I handed to you personally during our meeting in your office on the 16th of August? Ladies and gentlemen, early that morning, the morning of the 16th of August, 2017, I met with Mr. Muley in his office and urgently based on his request in order to give him a copy of the report of the Syrian National Committee and its investigation in the Khan Shaykhun incident. And I personally informed him that he himself is the only United Nations official that has a copy of that report. Number 2. The report, and on several occasions, mentions that the Al-Nusra Front is primarily in control of the city of Khan Shaykhun, including the crime scene. Therefore, the report is candidly saying and stating that those who prepared the evidence and fabricated the evidence and transported it to Turkey is the terrorist Al-Nusra Front organization, and that those who provided the so-called samples to the French, British, Turkish, and American intelligence services is the terrorist Al-Nusra Front, and that those who offered the false witnesses in Turkey's Gaziantep is the terrorist Al-Nusra Front, and that those who staged the crime scene and then buried it and manipulated it is the terrorist Al-Nusra Front. So after all this, how is it possible that the leadership of the mechanism is assured and confident that the conclusions it arrived at, based on what is called the chain of custody, which I say in English, chain of custody, how can it be sure that it was not manipulated by the Al-Nusra Front, which has been classified by your council as a terrorist organization? Al-Nusra Front is a terrorist organization, and it enjoys more credibility with Mr. Mulay than the Syrian government does. 3. Paragraph 9 of Annex 2 of the report notes that the Al-Nusra Front and members and groups allied to it on the 21st of March 2017 launched an offensive against forces of the Syrian Arab Republic in the direction of Hama city. And the report states that the Syrian army regained control and moved deeper until the 3rd of April 2017 to areas that are deeper in the locations it had previously lost, which means this happened one day before the Khan Shaykhun incident, just one day. And the question that I pose to everyone is, if the Syrian army was achieving these victories, as the report states, and is at the gates of Khan Shaykhun city, just one day before the incident takes place, Khan Shaykhun, which is under the control of the terrorist Al-Nusra Front, then why stage this crime with its well-known repercussions? Why? Why use chemicals? And who truly benefits from it? The only party that benefits is the terrorist Al-Nusra Front and the governments of the countries that are accusing the Syrian government, with the goal of obstructing the progress of the Syrian army against the terrorists that have been genetically modified into moderates, as their sponsors like to call them. Some consider that Al-Nusra Front is a moderate terrorism. Number 4. Why did the fact-finding mission and the joint investigation mechanism not visit Khan Shaykhun, i.e. the scene of the crime? Can one investigate a particular crime remotely, like you do while playing the PlayStation, without visiting the scene of the crime? Keeping in mind that the United Nations Department of Safety and Security, as was stated by my colleague, the representative of the Russian Federation, the DSS, confirmed the possibility of conducting such a visit. And here I would like to remind you of the pattern of not visiting the scene of the crime is nothing new to these mechanisms. For until this very day, the United Nations has not complied to the request that the Syrian government had made on the 22nd of June 2013 to investigate the crime of the use by terrorist armed groups of chemical weapons in Khan al-Asal, despite the fact that Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, had tasked Dr. Silstrom with the task of investigating this crime. 5 years have passed and the Khan al-Asal incident has yet to be investigated. I repeat, 5 years. Number 5. Why did the Al-Nusra Front, which controls Khan Shaykhun, rush to cover the crater with asphalt, and why did it meddle with the scene of the crime? If the sponsors of this terrorist organization have nothing to hide, then wouldn't it have been better for them to facilitate the investigation and prevent the compromising of the scene of the crime? Number 6. Why did the GIM not collect samples from the Al Shuairite air base, which the U.S. administration claimed to be the launching point of the chemical attack? And the interesting point, dear colleagues, here is that Mr. Mollet told me himself that he was the one who decided not to go to Khan Sheikhoun, and that he was the one who decided that it is not within the mandate of the mechanism to take samples from the Ash'airat airport. And the very important question that I pose to you now, ladies and gentlemen, is to know the motive that has led Mr. Mollet to take such serious decisions that affect the credibility of the JIM's conclusions. All of these questions, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, would surely have outraged Britain's Hitchcock himself. Number 7. Paragraph 30 in the report notes that the mechanism has received information on the presence of an airplane within 5 kilometers of Khan Sheikhoun. And it states that the expert it consulted concluded that depending on a number of variables, such as altitude, speed, and flight path taken, it would be possible for such an aerial bomb to be dropped on the town from the aforementioned distance. And despite the fact that it is impossible from a technical perspective for a Sukhoi 22 to deliver a strike to the town according to the flight path determined by the mechanism, the expert that the mechanism consulted used an expression that is conniving and misleading and inconclusive. He said, and I quote, "It would be possible." We go back to likely and unlikely. It would be possible to deliver a strike, and the mechanism rushed to adopt this conclusion. One expert comes, says it's possible, so the mechanism immediately grabs onto that without questioning it. 8. Paragraph 41 of the report, and I quote here, notes, "The mechanism also examined whether an improvised explosive device could have caused the crater, while that possibility could not be completely ruled out." End of quote. Can the mechanism's leadership explain to us and to you how it does not dismiss the fact that this crater could be the result of an improvised explosive device, while saying at the same time that it is confident that the crater is the result of an impact of an aerial projectile? How do these two issues fit together? How can we fit these two allegations together? First, they say there's a crater that's a result of an IED, and then they say that this is a crater that is a result of an aerial bombing. Number 9. In paragraph 45 of the report, the JIM notes that some of the evidence that was used to make these accusations to the Syrian government is that some of the Syrian samples were produced by a precursor chemical from the original stock of the Syrian Arab Republic, and it was called DF, the precursor DF, as some of the colleagues mentioned. And here, I ask the mechanism's leadership before you, why does it insist on misleading those who report the report by giving the impression that this sample is as solid as a DNA sample that can only be manufactured by the Syrian government, keeping in mind that any specialized Western laboratory can create such a sample? The Syrian scientists are the only ones who can create this DF precursor. This is only in Syria. And also would like to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that the Syrian chemical stock was destroyed on board the U.S. vessel MV Cabre in the Mediterranean. Therefore, it is likely that the party that destroyed the stock could have kept part of it with it, because they can't manufacture what our scientists produced. This DF is a strictly Syrian brand that only Syrian scientists can manufacture. The Americans can't create this precursor, so they may have kept part of it, part of the Syrian stock that they were tasked with destroying in the Mediterranean. American scientists are learning from our scientists when it comes to chemistry. Number 10. The absence of a tail fin at the crime scene, as has been stated by paragraph 58 of the report, does that not indicate that a certain party had manipulated the scene by creating the impression that an aerial bomb was dropped from the air, keeping in mind that the mechanism itself had said that the absence of a chain of custody relating to the munition remnants diminishes their probative value? However, this did not prevent the mechanism from concluding that the incident was as a result of a bomb dropped from the air. Number 11. In paragraphs 74 to 79 of the report, it notes that there's a conflict in information and witness testimonies, as well as unusual and inappropriate measures. This is what the report states. And here I would like to give just one example in order to show the degree of manipulation. And this was stated in paragraph 78 of the report, where it states that in sample number 13, the blood sample tested negative for sarin or a sarin-like substance, while the urine sample of the same person tested positive for this substance. It adds that medical experts consulted by the mechanism indicated that the combination of the negative result in the blood and the positive result in the urine was impossible medically. However, they insisted, the mechanism insisted on saying that, no, this proves the use of sarin, and this was proven by the medical test. It is scientifically impossible for sarin to be, for the blood not to have sarin and for the urine to have sarin. This is medically impossible. And despite all of these contradictions, the report acknowledges that the mechanism's leadership did not make any effort in order to uncover the reason behind these contradictions, even though the reason is quite clear, which is the method of manipulating evidence and information in order to make accusations against the Syrian government, just as what happened with the conclusions of the leadership of the former mechanism in report number 3 and 4. These were misleading conclusions that were employed by the American administration and used to attack the Ash-Shu'airat airbase. Ladies and gentlemen, I call you to use logic and good judgment and to seek clear answers and real ones to the questions that I have just posed and which have been posed by other colleagues. Syria reaffirms that it abides by the Convention on Chemical Weapons in letter and spirit, and that it no longer has any toxic chemical weapons, chemical supplies that are banned by the agreement since it acceded to the agreement in 2013. And this was confirmed by the head of the UN OPCW Joint Mission to Eliminate the Declared Chemical Weapons Program in Syria, Sigrid Kaag, and her report to this esteemed Council, which was submitted in June 2014. My country considers the use of chemical weapons an immoral act that must be condemned regardless of the place and the time and the condition. And as this report is published with its prefabricated conclusions, the final fig leaf falls. And it thus exposes the nakedness of the sponsors of terrorism, because the degree of manipulation of the reality and the facts in this report is unprecedented and far exceeds the manipulation that this hall had witnessed on the 5th of February 2003. The crumbling diplomatic history might be repeating itself in a pathetic scene that reminds the world of the fabricated claims that were made by Secretary Powell in a meeting that I personally attended in this very council on the 5th of February 2003, when Powell submitted evidence that he called facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. He said it in English.
Facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
In order to justify his country's aggression on Iraq. under the justification of Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction. And it is truly odd, Mr. President, that his colleague, Secretary Kerry, came back on the 26th of August 2013 to use the very same expression in order to mislead international opinion and to pre-justify an aggression against Syria at the time. Secretary Kerry used the same words as Secretary Powell before him. It seems that this syndrome is the exclusive property of the consecutive U.S. administrations. Ladies and gentlemen, allow us here to think aloud and to search for an answer to the question that concerns every Syrian, which is, how long will the Syrians continue to suffer from the terrorism that is being backed by Western governments? Governments that only view the United Nations and the Security Council as an iron fist to further their interests or commercial enterprise to achieve their goals. The governments of the law of force have left nothing forbidden anymore and has perpetrated everything against the Syrian people. And these governments continue to believe that they can kill and destroy and deceive and prevaricate without any accountability towards any poor law. Mr. President, what is the use of our organization if the governments of these countries continue to use our organization to bear false witness and to shatter countries such as what happened in Yugoslavia, to destroy other countries like Iraq and Libya, to besiege entire peoples and starve them and kill them, such as what is happening in Palestine and Yemen, to impose an illegal siege on countries such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran, and to bring a dirty terrorist war to my country, Syria, and the list goes on. In closing, the terrorist war that has targeted my country, Syria, has cost its sponsoring governments $137 billion so far. And this was admitted by one of its agents. And here I mean the former Prime Minister of Qatar, Hamad bin Jassim. This terrorist war, by his own admission to the media just a few days ago, was a joint plan that brought them together with the Saudis, the Turks, the Americans, the Israelis, the Jordanians, and Syria and its people to these governments was simply a prey that is fought over by hyenas. And here I will use the words that were used by Hamad bin Jassim himself. And he said, and I quote verbatim, "We fought over the quarry, and the quarry got away from us while we were fighting over it." That's what he said, the former Prime Minister of Qatar. Mr. President, my country, the Syrian Arab Republic, rejects in form and content the report of the joint investigative mechanism in the accusations it has made over the painful incident in Khan Sheikhoun. My country rejects that Syria, with its civilization of thousands of years, would become a prey or a target for the governments that sponsor terrorism. We will continue in our war on terrorism. We will rebuild our country. We will achieve the ambitions of our citizens with our blood, our sweat, and our efforts, and with the support of our friends who respect international law and reject the breaches of the Charter and would stand and face the policies of domination and the support of terrorism. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
jetzt ein König.
Seit 1997 ist die NASA mehrmals mit Mars-Rovern auf den roten Planeten zurückgekehrt. Ihre Untersuchungsergebnisse haben neue Spekulationen befeuert, dass es auf dem Mars mikrobielles Leben geben könnte.
Wir wollen wieder hin und diesmal andere Wege einschlagen.
Im Jet Propulsion Laboratory plant eine neue Generation von Ingenieuren die nächste kühne Mars-Mission. Mit einem Unterschied.
Wir wollen die Proben zu uns auf die Erde holen, damit wir sie mit Instrumenten untersuchen können, die viel präziser sind als die Geräte, die man zum Mars schicken kann.
Die NASA plant, Boden- und Gesteinsproben vom Mars auf die Erde zu bringen, um sie auf Indizien für vergangenes oder gegenwärtiges Leben zu untersuchen. Am Bau des neuen Landefahrzeugs ist auch der Mars-Rover-Entwickler Rob Manning beteiligt.
Derzeit bauen wir einen neuen Rover, der 2020 auf dem Mars landen soll. Er wird Dinge tun, die kein Rover zuvor getan hat.
Dieser Rover kann in Gestein bohren und uns Proben voller Mars-Geschichte beschaffen. So groß wie Kreidestücke. Das ist eine enorme technische Herausforderung.
Das Team testet, wie solche Bodenproben gewonnen werden können.
Derzeit bauen wir einen neuen Rover, der 2020 auf dem Mars landen soll. Er wird Dinge tun, die kein Rover zuvor getan hat.
Dieser Bohrer kann Proben aus weichem Sandstein und härtestem Granit extrahieren.
Wenn wir in einen Felsen gebohrt haben, kommt der Roboterarm hoch und bringt die Probe zum Rover.
Die Bohrprobe wird vorsichtig in einem